Welcome back, everybody. We are live at the State Aid for School Construction meeting. And the second part of our afternoon, actually the first part of our afternoon, the second part of our program for today is going to be a committee discussion. And we are going to take a look at the original draft that was submitted by Ledge Council, Beth St. James, and decide how we want to move forward with the framework that was proposed today vis-a-vis the draft that is more like a governance lens. So how those two will reside together and what changes, if any, we want to make. So can we pull up a copy of that draft? Is that possible? It would be nice to have it up on the screen.
We have it from, it's governance draft 1.1, it should be on our committee page.
Probably work on a paper copy or something like that.
Yeah, and
Some
maybe get
drafts.
some,
So, you will share.
Still don't have a paper copy.
right. No, I don't want to share my screen.
Was it last meeting we had
I'm
this?
gonna look under Beth's name on our committee page, and then we could probably get some copies quick.
Draft 1.1 is still.
Yep,
That was last meeting.
uh, so under Beth's name, our witnesses.
Here it is, okay. Got it, never mind.
Since that.
Yeah, Bessie and James, and under school construction, school governance, oh wait, no, sorry, not 101, oh, so not here. It's not here. Other documents on the committee page. It's here.
Excess spending presentation.
Nope, it's a draft bill, draft 1.1. Why is it not? Is it under bill?
It's titled School Governance in Vermont, and it has the date of, it was posted on Friday, September 27th.
Okay, would you like me to share my screen now?
Yeah. Could you print
Okay,
5
let me do that
copies?
First, let me send a request
There we go.
to.
Yeah.
Our school superintendent just resigned.
Who did?
Our school superintendent just resigned.
Who just resigned?
Springfield Schools,
She said 5.
Springfield Schools
Sure.
superintendent.
That doesn't-
Thank you.
Is it, Saw it in the paper. So, I will go.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank
Can
you
you just
so
let
much.
me know when I should scroll, or do you want the mouse so you can scroll? Do you want the mouse? Okay.
If I go back to our original like work plan, the beginning and our charge, we had in terms of like buckets of work, governance, the finance details, political hard decisions, which I think we were getting at some of them before lunch, and the technical pieces like assurances, et cetera. We've taken on a lot of information. We've had some good discussion really about all of them. We have this afternoon and then 2 more meetings to work towards a draft. Senator Gulick and I would propose that we go back to the existing draft we have on governance, now with a bit more on the table in terms of some of the finance details, the funding, and like how the excess spending threshold might impact things. And with some of these sort of political decisions about like what are the incentives, the strategic pieces, What if, what about projects that don't meet them? Keeping those sort of in the back of our mind as we go through governance and hopefully get closer to a final draft on that piece so that we can then start to button up the finance and the hard decisions, incentives, strategic priorities piece. So with that, Beth, do you mind coming up? We're gonna go through the draft.
Sorry, I told her she could stay there.
Oh, that's fine then. No, you're fine. Sorry.
Whatever
fine.
is going to be
That's
more
fine.
helpful to you all.
Let's, so folks have the draft back up. I think people have marked up versions from, so we start at the top.
I am sending you all a copy just so you have it.
Martin.
Is there, maybe this is where I can ask Deb, is there a way that we can compare this draft 101 with current law? So that we can see what we're changing or not changing, or shifting authority from one place to the agency, or?
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel, so what draft 1.1 is all current AOE responsibilities in current law, with the exception of rulemaking. I put that under the agency for this draft. And then I don't think that it was posted to your website, but I'd be happy to come up and share it again. Some responsibilities that are currently the state board's responsibility and was an open question for you all on where it lives. But it depends on how you want to spend your time, because you may not, those concepts may no longer be part of your program.
So is it that we need to figure out what our goal is first? Before we can figure out how we move forward with the program?
Do you want me to come up?
If you don't mind, that would be
I don't
great.
know, I mean, I'm just trying to. Cause I'm just looking at the notes that I've taken at our last meeting on the language, but it would be. A lot of it is new, a lot of it is picked up the Rhode Island model. It would be kind of nice to know. Is it meeting our goals?
Yes, so that's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. So I don't have a side by side. I'd be happy to do that for the next meeting. But I can go through and tell you, for example, we're looking at page 1, section 1. This is a brand new, what is being proposed here is a brand new, so the way that the program is structured now is it's just, there's no, AOE shall be responsible for running a school construction program. It just goes into like, there's a preliminary application and all of that, right? So what draft 1 does is it creates a whole new statute that says, okay, if we're gonna have a program, we're gonna have someone be responsible for it. And this draft proposes that it's the Agency of Education. And then all this draft does is list out what, in section 1, what the agency would be responsible for. So on line 6, subdivision 1, in current law, the agency is already required to review preliminary applications. So that's current law AOE. 2 was my one effort at throwing out a hot topic. Currently, rulemaking authority for school construction lives with the State Board of Education. This draft has it living with the entity that's responsible for the program. Complete policy decision for you all. Developing a pre-qualification and review process. Hold on, bear with me. I don't believe that that is a specific call out in current state law. I believe this is something I borrowed from Rhode Island. It's part of, currently AOE is responsible for coming up with some pre-qualification standards for project delivery consultants and architecture and engineering firms in relation to the grant program for creating a capital plan or a facilities management plan. So that exists in session law. Forget the act number from last year.
139, Bob?
What's that?
I think it's
139?
one,
Which one created the grant?
it's just,
149?
I believe it's 149. It's your enabling legislation. So number 3 was not necessarily spelled out in current law as far as chapter 123 in Title 16, but it is a requirement for AAB related to the grant program. Providing technical assistance and guidance to school districts and SUs, again, is language I borrowed from Rhode Island. It's not specifically called out in the current law, but again, the current law is not designed, it's not written as, the current law is written as an application process.
Can I ask a question, please? if you Don't mind. What is the point of comparing this to current law? And I'm asking that, I don't mean to be facetious. I am just curious. What is the point of the exercise of comparing this to what is current? Is that a good use of our time? And if so, why? Yes.
I don't think it's a great use of time, but I do think it's relevant that the next time we meet, that it be clear what we're modifying and where it came from. That would be helpful.
I mean, is this a modification?
Can I share my screen?
So
Okay,
just as an example,
yes, I got it join.
just the fact that the State Board of Education is not written in here at all, that's a change, okay? And I think that if that were like, clear as clear can be, that they ought to come in here and testify as well on their thoughts on that change. To me, that would just
I
be,
think that's the plan for next meeting, isn't it?
okay, well, it's good. I'm just saying with only 2 meetings left, knowing what we're changing, and again, I agree with you. I don't want to go line by line through this. I think we got bigger fish to fry. But knowing those kind of like 40,000 foot changes would be helpful for all of us to know what are the big muscle movements that we're changing.
I do think in terms of the state board, we have to keep in mind that since this program has been under moratorium, and therefore the state boards had no interaction with it, the entire membership of the state board is completely turned over. There's nobody there now who would have worked under the old paradigm, and actually our governance structure changed completely in that we took the state board and the Agency of Education from being a commission to being a cabinet level agency. And so I agree, but in this case, I think what existed in the state board back when this program existed was an entirely different construct. We had a commission, not an agency.
I agree completely. I just think that as one of the major influencers on state education policy, we ought to hear from them on this topic specifically, school construction. It'd be helpful. Maybe we glean something from it, maybe we don't. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
What do you all want from me?
Sounds like you almost want like a side by side with what is currently.
So if you will allow me to just show you what the current statute looks like. Okay. When we're talking about the current program, what we're talking about is 16 VSA 3448. This is the program, right? There's ownership over points in the program, steps in the process, but there's no ownership over the entire program. And my direction and what I've represented in draft 1.1 was to create kind of a home for the program. And so the way I did that was I went to section 3448 and I found everywhere it required the agency of education to do something and put that as a duty in draft one.
Mhm.
I also borrowed from Rhode Island. Rhode Island has a very similar setup to this concept where they have a statute called Roles and Responsibility of the School Building Authority,
Mhm.
which is their Department of Education. The School Building Authority is essentially like an office, a department, a group of people who work on the same thing within Rhode Island's Department of Education.
In AOE parlance, it would likely be a division,
Yeah.
right? Or a team. Yeah.
So I borrowed some concepts from their roles and responsibility that made sense based on the conversation you all are having and just what I understand of school construction. And so the things that I've borrowed from Rhode Island, if it was not a role that was currently assigned to the state board, I included it here as a responsibility for AOE. I showed you guys last time, but I don't think I ever sent it or posted it, is I had kind of a cheat sheet for everything that's not in draft one, but that lives in section 3448, that is a state board responsibility currently. And you all would need to decide, is this no longer a responsibility because it's not a part of our program that we're creating, and therefore we don't need to figure out who owns it? Does the state board need to continue to own it? Does AOE need to continue to own it? Are you creating a governance structure outside of AOE or the state board, like the advisory body that is in section 2 that owns that? So when we're talking about current law compared to section 1, section 1, I would say, is all current AOE responsibilities. And some concepts that are not in specific state law in Vermont that I've borrowed from Rhode Island. So no one owns them right now. And then I have a whole separate document I can show you if you'd like, that has the state board's responsibilities. But if you look at when we're doing the current program, there's a preliminary application, right? There's priorities. There's request for none of that is in draft 1.1. Because we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the program. This is just, where do some of those decision points live? The concepts that go into making those decisions don't live in draft 1.1 yet. So I don't know how to be most helpful to you right now, because I'm seeing some nodding, some shaking of heads, some furrowed brows.
Makes sense to me.
Go back up to the preliminary approval, which were right there. Approval for preliminary application. And I'm reading that, and that encompasses some language that we talked about this morning. Regional educational opportunities and needs. Building capacity across school district boundaries. And available infrastructure in neighboring communities. That language is there for our consolidation or regional approach. Is what I'm seeing.
Yes, I don't think we did a very,
Looked at this to see how it tracks to what we were talking about this morning.
we did a very high level, Bob and I in the second meeting, I think, did very high level of this is the program. There's a preliminary application. Then we hear the priorities, blah, 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 blah. But no, you are absolutely right, Rep. Emmons. We have not gone through where you want to go and whether or not that tracks with current law and that's where I was saying, like, I think that conversation you were having this morning is where you need to go. But I don't think you have, I think that if we were in committee and we were working on this every day, right? I would have been sitting over there listening to Jill's testimony as a witness. And the chairs would have said, okay, great, go back, put that into a draft. And then I would have come back the next day. And you would have seen the strikeouts, the underlined language, right? And it's hard to do that today.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was saying at the beginning is like nothing that's on the document you sent over was in any way intended to be legislative language. It's really, there are a lot of similarities with the previous program, and there's some really fundamental differences. And so when Bob and I were looking at it, it didn't, for us to build it, it didn't make sense to start from here, because I think what we actually would do is a crosswalk eventually, right? Once the decisions get made, then it's what exists. Is this a full strike through and we're writing it fresh? Or are we making changes and edits to this?
Given the length of time of the moratorium, all the work that's been done on the inventory, all the work that AOE did, I guess I feel comfortable in the first draft that we're starting fresh. This isn't like a bill that we're just sort of tweaking and updating a bit, because this is something that's sat on the shelf for so long, but.
And there's language in there that might
Right.
still be really
Yes.
helpful. And I'll say, Beth, I actually appreciate the approach that you took here, where the roles and responsibilities approach. And I do think that I understand why you sort of set aside the cheat sheet of the state board, because when we figure out what we want the program to look like, we don't know which of those roles and responsibilities still need to continue to be done, right? So if we started from, these are all the things that the state board was tasked with doing, that in my mind, that's a backwards way to do it. First, we build the program we want, and then we figure out who needs to do what. Yep. But that's just the way that my brain.
A second.
That's a good approach.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
we appreciate that.
I don't know if I should be concerned or pleased that you share.
So given that we have 30 minutes, we could do a couple of things. The teacher and me thinks we could go home and do some homework and read through the old draft language and see, what sparks conversation, debate, or interest, and what we might want to include or not include in what we're doing now. Or we just don't look at it at all and start afresh. What would folks like to do? Because we can't do this all in 30 minutes.
we can't do it all, but I will say that
2:30, aren't we?
at 2:30, we have an hour, and the teacher and me says kids don't do their homework, and we're trying to get away from homework as a practice and do our learning and thinking, engaging over here. So I think we start at the top and go back through the draft. There were some question things. We were doing this kind of rushed at the end. And so let's try to have some of those conversations where they come up.
But
And
I
see
do
how
want
far we can
to,
get, but yes, please.
yeah, I want to signal that in what Beth was just showing, the 3448, that's the details of the process of the program, right? So some of what we have in our roles and responsibilities is, I think, exactly who's making decisions about things. But we may need to refer back at times to say, like, okay, we're talking about a pre-application. What does that look like? There's good language in there. It's describing how you move through the program itself. So we might be bouncing back and forth between those things.
Sure.
But I would argue that until we figure out what program we want, we don't need to be editing that.
And I would just welcome people to look at 3448 in the next couple weeks if they would like to, and see how it informs their vision for things. How's that? It's not homework, but it's like you can get bonus work, get extra credit.
I don't have gold stars, but I do have pretty colored stars.
Okay.
This wants one, he was saying earlier. Yeah.
Thank you. Great, so back to.
I think we
draft.
can get through the draft in an hour and then have a clear list of what are the next things that we didn't deal with here or questions we didn't resolve, and the things that aren't in here that are going to need to be in here.
What would be most helpful for you to have on the screen?
That's-
Nothing or something?
How about, I don't think it matters. I think we all have it in front of us, right?
Yeah.
Does everybody have the
Your draft.
the draft bill?
Draft, okay.
Yes.
My recommendation would be to have it up on the screen.
Okay.
So as we talk about it, that those who are outside the
That's true.
room
Thank
can
you.
at least see what
Yes.
we're talking about.
Thank you. I always forget that. Thank you.
So want me to kick off on a question?
Sure. So we're on page 1.
So
Yeah, let's,
So page 1, paragraph 3, which is like halfway down, there's a tension in all these documents about new construction versus renovation. And I think we need to put that on the table and at least have a conversation about it. It's like, for example, line 13, it's about design and construction. I know it's not probably purposely leaving out renovation, but it is leaving out renovation. I think that tension between the cost of renovation and the cost of new construction is something that we've got to at least agree to disagree on. The renovation is roughly, and Bob, help me out if these numbers are wrong, but renovation typically is about a quarter of the cost of new construction. If you need new construction because you're creating a different footprint, I get it, but renovation is again, 25% of the cost of new construction. If you're just trying to create the right learning environment for students.
Can we have that fact checked? Is that true, Bob?
I would be comfortable giving any kind of fixed number like that, because I think it depends on what the overall renovation contains, right? It's one thing to look up, right?
In an effort to help you be efficient in your time, I would suggest that we look at the context of these 4 lines and whether that word is necessary here.
Okay.
This is about pre-qualification for architects, engineering firms, and consultants.
Mhm.
And those are the folks who would be doing the reconstruction, right?
Yep.
So I'm not sure that this is the place we need to debate that.
Good point.
That's for you all.
That's a good point.
So specific to line 13, I like to drop in the word after design, comma, renovation, comma, and construction. Just to have it in there that we're not pushing anybody down one path or another.
Yeah.
That's all.
Noted.
Thank you.
Am I leading this or are you all?
So can I? Do we have, I think our first sort of critical decision point is, do we have general consensus on where thank you, Beth. Beth is not. Do we have general consensus on whether or not the running of the program lies with an agency of education?
Because this is all falling under line 5, the agent.
In my mind,
Great.
yes.
Yes, in my mind, yes.
Yes.
Do you want to?
So in my mind, I think we still need to hear from State Board of Education before the city. Now, maybe a predetermined conclusion, but without them, at least they're not even in the room. And we've had several meetings. I just think it's appropriate that they have the chance to talk, and I'll leave it at that. And then we can determine after that
You
conversation.
can also take a vote right now and
I-
decide.
I hear that, I guess.
That's inappropriate.
Well, I think you're also developing an advisory board.
Right, I just want to make
Yeah.
Kind of replaces the State Board of Education.
clear though, in this section, what we're talking about, if we go up to lines 3 and 4, is who's responsible for implementing the program. The state board's never going to be responsible for implementing it. I mean, they're like, the master school board, like they're overseeing things, they're not implementing.
There is, yeah, and so I think there's sort of 2 pieces to this, and Beth, do you want to talk about the advisory board and why? Yeah.
Sure. So the advisory board, sorry,
Page.
Page 3, section 2.
so again, this is, it's infancy, right? It's meant to be beat up and policy decisions made that are not my decisions to make. This is just spaghetti for you all to see if it sticks. The advisory board has a composition that is different than the State Board of Education. And in this draft, it's not it doesn't take on necessarily all of the roles that the state board would do. It's a completely separate, just school construction aid advisory board. But it is an advisory board, right? So it is just advise, have any powers or duties. Its duties are to advise. So if you are looking for something with more teeth or more power, this section will need a lot of work.
Can I ask Beth, can you be sort of the facilitator of this? I think, because you know this draft the best. And so while we're probably kind of going line by line, sort of section by section. So if you don't mind being kind of the driver of the walkthrough here. And let's try to stay in order unless there's a real reason to jump out of order.
I think I would, yes, I'm happy to facilitate the conversation, but I would want to know what your goals are first, right? So we can go line by line and say this, I took this language from Rhode Island, this is a responsibility already in state law. But if you've made the decision that you want this program to live with AOE, then I don't think there's, other than rulemaking is the only responsibility I put in this draft that was not either currently, that belonged to someone else in current state law. It's the only responsibility that I put in here that belongs to someone else in current state law.
But you are expanding the responsibility of the agency because you've picked up quite a bit of language that's from the Rhode Island model.
Yes, and I would punt to AOE and say, I would make some ventures that they are doing quite a lot of this already. And so what we're doing is we're capturing all of the work that needs to go into this program so that everyone knows it. So, I mean, that might be a conversation that could be helpful to you all if you want to focus on the responsibilities for state aid for capital construction implementation, what AOE is currently doing, what they're not doing, and whether you need to put it in here at all, or that could be part of a larger conversation once you figure out what the program looks like.
Senator Norris wants to speak, but I would just say there is no body in state government that is suited to do this work other than the AOE. That's just, I mean, sorry, I'll just leave that on the table, but go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. As you all well know, this is not exactly my wheelhouse, education. But having said that, maybe someone could enlighten me as to how many members are on the State Board of Education, who they might be, or what's the makeup of the State Board? I hear Senator Weeks calling for, I was curious as to who they were.
Listed 9 or 12, it's listed on the AOE website somewhere.
Yeah, I can,
Plus 2 students.
I can,
You got it?
the part-time board. I think that's really important.
Yes. Very part-time.
Very part-time.
Volunteer board.
Yeah, volunteer board. All appointed by the governor.
Yes.
this is the current makeup of the state board.
And Kim and Jenna are both going to be exiting in February.
They're both what?
Exiting in February, their terms
Oh,
are
okay.
ending. And there's 2 student, yeah, as Aaron said, there's 2 student members.
So right now, the state board does the standards, and everything, or did, for school construction. Do they have the authority to promulgate rules?
They own the rulemaking authority for almost every education program. There are some that the agency owns, but specifically here, the state board currently owns the rulemaking authority for school construction.
The agency owns district quality standards, so that was rulemaking that was created by the
But
legislature.
that's one of the questions we need to grapple with is, do we want some of this to reside in rules or in statute?
Yes, a lot of, so I would say some of what AOE presented this morning lives in statute currently, the concepts behind it. And some of it is in rules, right? That nice color prioritization tower, if you will.
Yeah.
That's in rule.
So then the question is for us, the policy decision, where do we want that authority to promulgate the rules stand? With AOE or with the state board?
Right, and
That's
that's,
a policy decision for us, correct?
yes, and that is again, page 1, lines 9 and 10. It's the only effort I made to force a policy decision was taking rulemaking authority from the state board and putting it into this draft and giving it to the agency. That is totally a policy decision for you all. You all could give rulemaking authority to someone else. You could create a body and give them rulemaking authority.
You could have the advisory board do it.
Absolutely.
Their board have rulemaking authority.
I believe so.
Water Resources or whatever it used to be called, has rulemaking authority, Environmental Board.
Yep.
A lot of boards.
The Board of Nursing has rulemaking authority, the dental board has rulemaking authority, the medical board has rulemaking authority, right? So. I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg situation, right? What is it that you want to be in statute and what is it that you want to be in rule? And would that make an impact on who owns those rules? Would that make a difference to you in your policy decisions?
Can you say that again?
So if, for example, prioritization, like that point system, that currently is in rules and the school construction manual or whatever that's called, which is not even rules, which is a whole separate legal conundrum for effectiveness. So are you I'm speaking to legislators, going to delegate,
Notice I'm very quiet right now.
delegate rulemaking authority to an executive branch body? Who is that body? And what are the parameters around that authority? You, as the legislative body, delegating your your writing the law authority, you need to give the executive branch clear intent and direction. And so does your intent and direction influence who owns those rules? Or does who owns those rules going to influence the intent and direction that you're delegating, right? It's a chicken or the egg situation, from my perspective.
Thank you for that. I would just say from my perspective, I like professionals making decisions about professional things that they're experts on. And I would say that the AOE, this is their wheelhouse. This is the work that they do. They are experts, Bob Donahue, Joe Briggs Campbell, in doing this work. And I personally would like to see them running this show. I think I like the idea of a separate school construction board that's made up of superintendents. I mean, this is just in my world, construction experts, people from the field, business
Someone from the
owners,
state board.
someone from the state board. So in that body, you've got all kinds of, folks with a stake in all of this. But I guess I want the folks making the decisions to be the experts and not a layperson.
I would second that, and especially if we're gonna land on the advisory board thing. For simplicity's sake, I would like to not have 3 entities with their hands in this, because then we're talking the state board, the AOE, and this new advisory council. Like, well, 2 is plenty, and also just would be more efficient. So if we're gonna have an advisory council and the AOE, to me, that's having a 3rd player complicates things. But
I think in your framework, Beth has drafted, the agency is tasked with running the program, building the giant construction guide, which is a lot of the actual meat of what gets done, or what kinds of projects get done, et cetera, et cetera. The advisory board, the agency makes recommendations based on their review of projects for which projects should be funded and at what % to the advisory board. And then there's that extra advisory board then would go to the legislature each year and say, this is our list of projects for funding. That's the construction you have, right?
No,
Oh, okay.
none of that detail is baked into the roles and responsibilities.
I may have been projecting out from the Rhode Island model there. So there is a layer there, which I think is an appropriate layer, frankly.
Okay. So I'm hearing that for the purposes of the next draft, I am not changing subdivision 2 in section 1. Rulemaking authority for school construction is going to live with the Agency of Education for draft 2.1.
I think so.
That's what I'm hearing. Notice I'm not saying final recommendation, just draft 2.1.
No, it's fine. All I'm saying is that we ought to have state board in here to have a voice. just let them testify. It's appropriate.
Particularly if you're pulling power away from them.
Mhm.
Whether or not they've used it because of the moratorium, whether or not they're governor appointees, they have the authority now to promulgate rules, to do the standards. If you're taking that away from a body, they should be heard.
Great.
And would it be helpful to give any context about the major change that happened in 2012?
To what? To the board?
It would be helpful.
We're not all education people.
Okay, so, when the school construction program was up and running, so prior to 2007, there was a Department of Education that was overseen by the State Board of Education.
That's what you were saying.
Mhm.
And then in 2012, that was changed. We made the department an agency. We went from a commissioner of education to a secretary of education, a member of the governor's cabinet. And the roles and responsibility of the agency and the state board were changed. The state board no longer has oversight over the agency. But the section 3448 lives in infamy. Thank you very much. As thank you for this. I know. Thank you so much. Lives. Oh no.
Wrong plug.
Nope. Wrong side. Section 3448, the law you have on your books was written under the current regime, right? And so those roles and responsibilities may be ripe for a second set of eyes, given the roles and responsibilities of our Agency of Education and State Board of Education now. Again, that is 100% policy. But it is, I think, important context to have because it's not an apples to apples comparison. To how the things are currently functioning as far as governance on a state level for education.
My understanding is that the state board is also doing its own internal review of roles and responsibilities. They recognize and have discussed that there's a lot sitting in Title 16 that may be legacy, it may be things that, so I agree. I think it's, absolutely worth a conversation with them. And if they have the capacity and expertise to do that work, if they would, if there's any disagreement, I actually don't know.
Yeah.
It's not a question I've
I
asked.
would say for draft 2.1, let's forge ahead.
I need a purple check mark. Where are we going from here? Do we want to go item by item? Do we want to see what is state board responsibilities that are not in this draft? Do you want to focus on the advisory committee?
Being that this is a month old, how about we at least highlight, if any of us have questions or input, just as we move through a page?
Sure.
As opposed to going line by line.
That sounds good. So are we on to page 2?
So
Senator Reed?
page 2, line 4. I think the intent of this is to say available facilities condition data as opposed to just available data. It's the condition reports that are the most important, that I think we're trying to keep current. Maybe just inserting the word condition data.
I had a note from our last discussion on that specific section that there was maybe some conforming needed with Act 72.
Act 72,
We
I
passed.
was that too.
So Act 72 was session law and it was not all of it. Some of it lives in statute, but when you're talking about the facilities condition index, that is all session law. That was a one-time project. So I am suggesting here that you make this an ongoing responsibility.
I would agree.
And you can manipulate that language to be whatever you want. If you put in just condition, that's a policy choice, but I would say do you want them to understand? I would say condition doesn't necessarily include like 21st century education, et cetera. Or maybe it does. I'm not the construction expert. So I would just, again, what's your goal? What data are you looking for? And then we can come up with the words to reflect that.
Would it be helpful to describe?
Fine tune, I have fine tune in terms of what data do we want collected.
Can I
Yes.
Can I describe what we've already done? Okay, that might be helpful. So Act 72 required a comprehensive facilities assessment. That work is complete. It now lives in a database that we will have in perpetuity. And it includes all major systems. Bob, feel free to jump in. All major systems, including, the replacement costs, square foot. It also includes the age of the building. It includes current enrollment. It includes, we've actually crosswalked it with FRL data. This is now all existing, readily available in a public-facing dashboard, which will be posted very soon, once I'm done driving around the state, and will be available for everyone. In addition, our districts are able to update that, so it is live and current. And so that is going to be our main source of information, I think, moving forward. And it's a comprehensive look that they can update as they replace systems and make changes and do renovations. So it will always be a live look at
Which we did in our last task force work. Yes.
Yeah, so I hear everything you're saying, but the May update is different from the shall update. This really needs to be a dynamic tool where we keep all the structure that you've created.
Yeah.
And we keep it dynamic at some periodic level or periodicity, that we keep it fresh so we can prioritize appropriately these school projects.
Sure.
That's the only difference I'm trying to make. And,
Yeah.
and just leaving it as data, what are you looking for? You're looking for, square footage, or you're just looking for a number of students? You really need to be specific that what you're trying to do is create this living, dynamic facilities condition database. So you can make the decisions, which all this funding is going to be predicated.
Which is what Jill just,
No, it's not what she said.
okay, what?
She said that we have a snapshot in time, that schools can or may was the word,
Okay.
update. What I'm advocating is, I think it's a great program, it's a great tool, but it ought to be kept up.
Yes.
That's all.
So I think we might actually have another existing lever that we can pull, which would be district quality standards, and that we can build into district quality standards that they are, as they make, so Bob's taking notes, that as they make updates to their systems, that those are put into the existing database on a periodic basis. So I think what I'm saying is we may not need additional statutory language there, because we actually have the mechanism of district quality standards as a way to hold folks accountable. However, I don't disagree with you that number 7 is a little big, and we could make it more specific. What are you asking the agency to maintain in terms of a database? So I think it would be facilities condition index. I mean, Bob, I think you could probably.
I don't argue a justifiable opposite point. If there's other data like student performance and outcomes that you do earlier, maybe that's correlated to facility condition, right? So to be able to pull in data, all I'm saying is to be able to pull in whatever data we think is relevant to advocating for doing something or not doing something. So I'm just saying, specifying just facilities data locks you in. Specifying data says maybe next year there's a legislative mandate or a requirement that requires us to do a different data collection than we even know we need today. Like, in other words, there may be a green energy initiative that's forced on us, and we don't know how many people have green energy in their building. We should be able to just go out and solicit the data requests of them, which I can go, oh, no, all you can do is ask X, Y, just a thought.
I'm trying to help you out.
Absolutely.
I want to help you 5 years from now, when
Yeah.
you're still doing this and we do have funding.
Right.
And we're able to take current information on the schools so we can appropriately prioritize. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And doesn't call that out here.
Right.
I think it would be useful for you.
Can
Or just
we,
data,
could we
data
work
relevant.
on wordsmithing it a little bit?
Yeah.
Like maybe offline and giving Beth some suggestions to bring back for
That would be
version
great,
two?
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I want to think through the implications of us starting to tie things like academic performance and that sort of thing. Like I made a little face there because my brain.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
just one off the cuff.
No, but I'm with you. Like, what might the incoming data requests be? And we actually have an infrastructure right now.
Yeah.
That's a pretty sophisticated infrastructure. And,
Like our capacity and use survey.
yes,
What if they're saying they don't have enough counseling spaces in there?
yeah,
We should, that would inform how do we change the footprint of the school?
yeah.
Those I think are relevant. And
Why don't Bob and I do some brainstorming on this
Okay.
and then we
Yeah.
can.
And I think the
give you some
The
language.
pace of technology is gonna be so wild in the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's hard to bake that in. Go ahead, sorry.
I'm waiting for you all to ask questions or make notes. I've made a note on number 7 there.
Mhm.
I will say that language taken directly, literally verbatim from the Rhode Island
Yeah,
statute.
yeah.
And
We actually know what they have in terms of their database. The Rhode Island database, we know what they've got. This language came from Rhode Island.
And, depending on the wordsmithing involved and depending on your goals, you can either modify this language or you could delegate in rule, right?
Yeah.
To refine, you could say something like collecting and maintaining readily available data according,
As
In
determined
accordance
by the
with-
agency, yeah.
rules or whatever, if you want to get really granular.
Yeah.
So just you've got options.
Thank you.
Collecting, maintaining publicly available, et cetera, that is taken directly from Rhode Island.
Can we hit another just specific as opposed to going line by line?
Yep.
Just another observation. Same section, but what I think may be missing from section 1 is that we should be collecting, maintaining, and making public the repurposing of schools that are targeted for closure. I think somebody really needs to own that we maintain that list, because if we can't, half of our battle is going to be not only just do we consolidate, but what do we do with the facilities, right? Without that, the public's just going to go nuts on us, and it's political suicide. So anyway, I think that, I know that the agency
No, that's,
isn't going to necessarily make those decisions.
yeah,
but-
maintain the list. No, I mean, that would be helpful for us. We're often asked about school closures and we have to go hunt it
Isn't
down.
there a piece though where the district doesn't own the building, but?
No, the district owns the building.
Okay, the district.
Yeah.
does.
They often
Okay.
sell the building and then we have to do a bunch of advice to them about the implications of selling the
And
building.
what we did a number of years ago was forgive the community from having to pay back any school construction share that they received on that building, if they were closing that building or selling it. Because in the past, they would have to have paid back a certain percentage of any state aid school construction that they got on that building.
I think that's still on the book.
Big picture.
I think that's still on the book.
It is, we repeal, right now, they don't have to do that as an
Right.
incentive. No building.
Big picture, if this is all set up correctly, well enough, we hopefully won't be in a place that schools have continued construction bonds and are closing like that.
Right.
That shouldn't be.
Some of those bonds are 30 years old.
Oh,
I want to
Some of
point
those
something out on number 10. Number 10 would necessitate funding.
You're talking about line 10?
Number 10, line 11 on page 2. That necessitates funding. We know how much it costs to do comprehensive facilities assessments every year. It's not cheap. And so if that is something that we want done, it needs to have money attached to it.
I got.
We funded it,
But why would we do that? We already did one.
We have the database.
We're 400 million the whole annually for 20 years. Get an update next year or 5 years from now, is it 9,600? I'd rather put the 2 million towards.
I would agree. And if we have a database, and the reason that Rhode Island has this is that they do not have a database that is updated live.
Right.
So I think we've actually maybe solved this problem. And then you're absolutely right. It's a matter of requiring districts to do the work to keep that live and active.
So we can strike
Strike
10.
them.
Okay.
Great.
Or
Change
because
it
it's
to 10
connected to
years.
7, because it's connected more to 7,
I'll play devil's advocate.
line
Okay.
4.
Okay, so line 12, page 2, line 12, I think the key is the capital needs. We have to quantify what the cost is, and they're doing that every 5 years from the database. I think that's a relevant exercise.
Mhm.
So it's about the capital needs. It's not about, maintaining the database. I think that should be something you figure out the right periodicity. But quantifying the cost of those capital requirements, I think would be very helpful to the legislature. So currently it's whatever, 300, 400 million a year. Well, what is it 5 years from now? Given all the changes we make, maybe we consolidate some schools, et cetera, but that's a dynamic financial
But
answer.
what did you say the cost was?
That was generated from the database, though. That $300 million a year was generated from, so all of the, I think it'd be helpful maybe if we walk through the database next time. Maybe we could do a little tour. So we can see what's in there, because there's dollar amounts attached to that. And as those updates are made, Bob, you made the calculation, so I'm gonna stop talking and let you speak to how it was done.
Oh, yeah, if they inventory all the assets, they come up with a relatively current rate of labor and materials to update the asset. And those just get totalized, the whole SUSD. So if anybody was to go in now and then say change their boilers out, they would have the modern price, they would have their total project price, they would enter that into the database, and that would just become part of the capital projections going forward, as well as just capturing what the costs are current. So the whole idea of this database is it's not only gonna just be a repository of all the data that gets updated as they do their work, but then we're gonna have a portion of it that also becomes part of the capital projections for the ensuing years down the road. So that now all school districts can basically do a data dump and say, okay, without doing anything that we know specifically, the remaining useful life of this equipment's coming to zero, it puts it into the calendar year for when it should be replaced. It's just a placeholder for them to have a basic framework for a capital improvement plan that they then have to massage as it strategically fits into whatever their plans are going forward.
Senator Weeks, you're on a roll.
How about a compromise? You just say in page 2, line 4, paragraph 7 there, just adding then and capital needs. That's the point. You're doing all the right things.
Mhm.
We just need to make sure we do it periodically.
Sure.
Every 5 years for a financial look at the capital requirements is appropriate.
We'll work on it. Yeah, we'll work on it. I like where you're going, and I like that I think what you're trying to do is ensure that we are continuing to maintain the good work that we laid a foundation. We want to keep the foundation in good order because we need it to drive decision-making, and I don't disagree because we tend to have a short attention span in the state, right? And things fall off.
Is there a way to connect this to what, Bob, you were just saying, which is basically that the local school districts need to have their facility management plan? We need to have a 5-year capital plan. Is there a way to link this update, to link it back to those facility management plans or 5-year capital plans? Because that's really where where the changes are going to occur, is back at the local level.
Yeah.
When it's time for them to replace a roof, or it's time to replace the heating system or whatever. It goes back to their 5-year capital plan. Is there a way to connect this language
I
with,
think the short answer is yes. I think
that's really what you're looking
it
at.
all lies in the power of IT and what are the resources available to do that. That's what I think. In other words, when I worked for International Paper, worldwide organization, and they had one common database that they all shared, right? So you roll up their cost from an accounting perspective. Well, if the state were to actually be the one that drives a work order management system, program management system, capital project management system as a part of data collection, that all schools are reporting everything uniformly into a master database, that then just do the totalizing, that just seems like a smart thing to do. But it also comes down to massive IT undertaking with a lot of cost to it, a lot of training, a lot of updating. And so who should rightfully own the burden of the cost of implementing a statewide solution from an IT perspective? I would advocate the state does. It just makes sense. Now we're driving everything that we want. We design the system we want for the data that we think pertains to any decisions we're gonna be making down the road. That's a huge cost.
Senator Weeks.
I submit that we leave that problem for another day.
Yeah. No, I'm just answering the question. Is it
I mean,
possible?
I get it. I get it 100%, but not to get side railed.
Yeah.
So we'll leave number 10 for now, apparently. Okay. 11. Or does anyone have any questions? I guess it's doing this.
I think 13, item 13 will be an interesting conversation for us as we move forward. So I just want to like signal that we may come back around to that one as we're thinking about cost containment strategies moving forward. So just.
Yes, people have strong feelings about that one.
They really do. Other states do this.
Yeah, I know,
Rhode Island does.
I know, but we're different.
Yeah.
We are.
Okay, so now we're on page 3, Senator Norris.
You're looking for input?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so section 2, on page 3, section 2, the advisory board, I do recommend for conversation purposes, at least initially, that we add a state board of education representative. And then go from there. And if it survives, it survives. If it doesn't,
Who would be advisory board?
as far as membership, yeah.
We have, you didn't put that in there?
No.
Okay. I guess that depends on what role, if any, the state board is gonna play, which we haven't determined yet.
Right, but
I would, yeah, I
Before
would
we
agree.
forget
That's a good position to have on there.
And, okay,
So you had mentioned
Mhm.
having a superintendent or something like that. I think in some ways that makes good sense. However, I think there's a real,
I was just throwing that out.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
went to that.
that would disqualify them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's problematic because these are the folks who are going to be taking recommendations
No, I
and
was
then,
throwing people, I was just throwing things on,
Yeah.
spaghetti on the wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got 3 folks who are ex officio. State treasurer, commissioner of BGS, and executive director of the bond bank or designate. So they would have no voting.
Doesn't that, ex officio does not necessarily mean no voting. So I don't think it's not, so that would be a policy decision for you all.
So ex officio in this draft means what?
They have a seat at the table because of their role. So it's always, so it's the ex officio, I don't know the Latin off the top of my head, but it's about the role. It's not necessarily about whether they have voting rights.
So would they have voting rights?
They, in this draft, yes, because it's not specifically say, it doesn't say that they are non-voting members, but that's a policy decision for you all. And this is, most of this, so the 4 members is really borrowed from the Rhode Island model, absent more specific direction from you all. Rhode Island also had a couple ex officio members, and the positions didn't really make sense. They weren't easily translated, so I just picked ones that made sense in a vacuum, but they may not be who you end up staying with. Right, like BGS, we haven't mentioned them once in any of our conversations, right? Do they have a seat at this table? The bond bank, you know, I don't know. So again, this is all for you to consider. So the 4 members in subdivision B here is borrowed from Rhode Island. The makeup of this, first of all, I think policy decision is this an advisory body or do they have real power? And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but advisory is to advise and then someone else makes the decision. So do they have any decision-making power? The makeup can be whatever you want it to be.
I would say we should probably start with the first question, like, do they, because that will, do they have,
What are they doing?
are they advisory or are they decision-making? Because that might dictate who they are. So what are our thoughts?
yeah, it's interesting. So if we look at duties,
Yep.
On page 5. I would have, when I was thinking about this, I think I was giving them more power, Beth. So I was thinking of this as, and maybe they are advisory in the sense that they would be taking the recommendations of the agency, both on which projects get funded, but more to what you have here. Things like if there is a 5-year bonus incentive cycle, if there is changes to prioritization over time, this is the body that would be likely taking some recommendations from the agency, but other folks as well on like a 5-year cycle. And then that would then be recommendations made to the legislature.
Programmatic changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was thinking. And there is some, there's some of the stuff that's in here makes more sense to, I think, sit over in the agency, right? So like number 6, the collection and maintenance of the clearinghouse of prototypical students, right? Like that sort of, there's some duplications, right?
So, but let's go back up here. If you look at line 5 on page 5,
Mhm.
this is the advisory board shall advise.
Yeah.
So this is all things that they are advising the agency on. This is not them owning these.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
right, so
Right.
they are advising the agency on the collection and maintenance of the clearinghouse of prototypical. And this is again, borrowed from Rhode Island,
Yeah.
absent more specific direction. We can do whatever you want, right?
Yeah,
We
but
can-
the Rhode Island, one of the differences is that Rhode Island is the Department of Education that sits under a state board. So what I'm wondering, what makes me a little cautious, it's that roles and responsibilities. So what if they're advising the Agency of Education on priorities and the Agency of Education says those are the wrong priorities? Like I would rather, I think, that the prioritization actually sits in statute, right?
It doesn't right now.
I know it doesn't right now. And I actually, that makes me nervous. Because we do now have 3 bodies involved in this. We have the Agency of Education that's taking advice from an advisory board that it is existing here. But then we have the legislature who makes law.
Why do you need an advisor? I'm not trying to be facetious here. I'm literally asking.
Why do we need an
Why do you
advisory
need
board?
an advisory body?
You don't need it.
Why have it? What's the benefit?
An oversight.
But isn't can't the legislature also an oversight? I mean, I'm not quite sure where this whole conversation is going, but if the agency creates a prioritized list, whether they're advised or not, is the end goal that it comes back for the legislature for funding?
I don't know that it is. I think that is kind of what happened in Rhode Island. I'm not sure that's what we're thinking. I would err in our current conversation right now on giving advisory board a bit more weight and teeth.
I would do it almost so to me, the benefit of an advisory board is that it creates a buffer, theoretically a political buffer, I guess, or something. It creates a buffer between the executive and the legislative.
Yeah.
Around what I think are the actual key things about this program, which is the prioritization and the bonus incentives, if we stick with that model. But really, like, what are the strategic things we're driving towards? And the legislature can be too quicksilver, right? And so then there's not stability and districts can't plan. And the agency, I think, could make recommendations, but I don't think ultimately that they should be making decisions around the statewide strategic priorities for state construction aid. I think they should make recommendations as the subject matter experts and the folks doing the program. So if they made recommendations to an advisory board on like a 5-year cycle, a cadence that districts can actually absorb, and then then the changes would go into statute. Was my thinking.
I'll say why I like an advisory board, because it is probably going to be made up of folks who are very passionate about school construction and have their eye on the ball. It's going to be a public facing body, so like their meetings will have to be public. Folks will be able to, from the community, will be able to weigh in and go to the meetings and listen in and see what's happening. And you know, I think to a certain extent, it demystifies all of it because it is public facing.
Yeah, like the AOE is the job of the construction team is to run a construction program. So I do think that some of the duties here don't necessarily make sense to me in terms of like it's almost like kind of a micromanagement of a program. Whereas I think it would be better if it functioned more as like what are the big policies, what are the priorities, and then ultimately making recommendations on funding decisions to the legislature.
And that's my question. What decision-making authority or responsibility does the advisory board have?
Well,
Because if it's a public entity, that for a public face to be out there, the public may think, well, you can make this decision. And are we giving them the authority to make certain decisions, or are we saying, no, it's AOE that makes these final decisions? So you're really giving a false sense to the public in terms of being transparent with the advisory board if they can't make some decisions. And we haven't figured that out. Maybe they do make some decisions, but what decisions do they make? And when you were talking the Rhode Island model, their board oversees AOE. Well, that's the way our old structure was. Our state board oversaw the Department of Education. And now we've flipped that. Do we even need an advisory board? Because if we're giving the power to AOE to make decisions on school construction projects and work with the school districts, and then make those recommendations to the legislature in terms, these are our priority projects for this year that should be funded, what role does the advisory board have?
In my opinion, advisory means advisory, doesn't mean, I mean, it wouldn't be an advisory board if they're actually making a decision.
So do we need AOE to have a board that advises them on things?
I was thinking that the advisory board is really more advising the legislature on what would be the priorities, the strategic priorities. You need a body of people who can hunker down and do that work, right? In alignment with a future education kind of strategic plan and vision. And I think that the legislature, there's too much shift over time, right? At too rapid a pace. And so there's not going to be continuity. I think the agency could make recommendations around what those priorities will be, but the Agency of Education does not set the statewide vision for education any more than the state board does, or any more than the legislature. It's a collective vision.
Well, actually, in statute, the state board is required to, by law.
yeah, it is.
It's happening right now, but that is
It's not, but it is there.
It's in law. I'm just.
Yes,
there's.
Yeah, I know, there's part of roles and responsibilities, yeah.
Yes, Senator Reed.
Can I, so while we're discussing the advisory board, can I recommend though that in section 1, we add what Jill has brought up about, we add that the AOE presents a prioritized bonding request for legislature. That's kind of a summary of conversations that are happening here.
I think that's going to depend on your funding mechanism, and you haven't gotten there yet.
Maybe
Okay.
presents projects to be funded.
Right, well, that's the intent.
Yeah, a prioritized list of approved projects.
Yeah.
There you go, something to that effect, that's a responsibility, that if you're gonna take all these other responsibilities, whether we have an advisory board or not,
Right.
that you then communicate that back to the legislature.
Let's call on our experts over here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Christopher Joint Pistol. I just wanted to chime in on 2 points. One, Senator Weeks, I think you're absolutely right that how you tweak that language will depend in large part on your funding source. And I think as my understanding of your conversations up to this point is that you're not contemplating the state bonding for additional dollars. Rather, it would be school entities doing the borrowing, and then the state's role would be to provide a debt service subsidy that's not using bonded dollars. But I do just want to raise something for you all to consider. That if you have an advisory board preparing a list of recommended projects and funding levels without regard to the state's overall fiscal picture, you are not setting yourselves up for success in this decision-making process. So I would strongly urge you all to think through a process where the funding recommendations for this program are going through the governor's recommended budget process, because it is much easier to get something funded when it is included in the governor's recommend than it is to have some advisory board saying, we recommend that the legislature come up with $100 million for these projects that are really important, and it's going to be on you all to figure out how to find that money. So I would strongly urge you all to think about how these funding requests and priorities can dovetail into the annual budget process at the front end, because I think that's the only way that you are going to have long-term success.
Agree.
Very good point.
All right, well, then that really does call into question the role of the advisory board and if we need it.
And I just want to, so I have a couple of things, I just want to food for thought, I'm just completely stepping out of my lane. This whole meeting. One, you are going to continue to add and subtract roles and responsibilities as you fine tune your program.
Yeah.
So I have made a note about recommendations to the legislature. Two, there are other models that exist in state government, including the Agency of Education, that are hybrids of what you all are talking about. For example, the Standards Board for professionals, right? None of them are AOE employees, I don't believe, right? They live administratively within AOE, they have rulemaking authority, they do all of the licensing for teachers. That they own those rules, they own all of that licensing. AOE supports them administratively. This is very similar for all of our professional regulation in the state. So there are models out there that exist that we can we can cobble from, but I do think if you're going to continue to use the word advisory, that's it. And if you want to give them any power, we need to rename it. Because that's not advisory.
So I think my question is, and I have to leave in 6 minutes or else Annie's gonna track me down. Is what is the mechanism by which we evaluate our priorities and our strategic aims for this program? And I think I'm kind of agnostic about it, but what is that mechanism? And that I think the only kind of guardrails around it is that we need it to be on a regular cycle. And that cycle needs to be long enough that districts can plan, because these projects take a really long time to plan for. It really is like a 5-year cycle, right? And so we need to give them some assurance of what direction they're heading in and not pull the rug out from under them as the winds change, like every, 2 years. I wasn't going to say 2 years, but you said 2 years. And so I think that for me is actually the critical piece here. Some of the other bits of it for an advisory body are somewhat, I think they can be absorbed in other ways. So that is for me the crux of it, is how do we make changes over time that are aligned to our statewide shared vision?
Senator Norris, did you put your hand up? No?
Negative,
Okay, sorry.
but thank you.
Okay, so Jill needs to go momentarily. Any last questions for Jill or comments? We're at 5 minutes.
Gonna recommend that we all wrap up.
Yes, I think we need to wrap up at 2:30. Yeah.
Can we talk about the next meeting, the timing of?
Yes,
Sure.
can I put, I have on my notes in terms of planning for the next meeting, the things that we definitely need to deal with are some state board feedback. We clearly have to move forward on this question of the advisory board. Are they advisory or are they something more? We may need to come back to the excess spending threshold.
Never, no.
Spiral.
Is that a boat?
We need to deal with the funding mechanism.
We talk about what's gonna live in statute and what's gonna live in.
Right, what is statute versus what is rule? And I guess that is sort of the header above. What are the priority strategic incentives?
Can I offer
Who's setting
something?
them?
Yeah,
Not us, who's setting it?
Yeah, can I offer something? I think that based on some of the feedback today, when we were having the conversation around like strategic or bonus, I think that Bob, I'd like you and I and Annie to kind of come back, take these notes. And I think we can offer a couple of other solutions based on what we've heard. And maybe bring those back to folks as well.
Yeah, I don't think you've heard this. I think that conversation was a little stunted and that we actually need to have a conversation about prioritization and bonuses. I don't think, I for one haven't had a chance to
No.
dig into that at all.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah, but I think there's some, so we kind of had one structure for doing it. I think we can offer maybe a second structure as well, just to give folks some options of how we might conceptualize this based on where we might go with priorities.
As long as you don't take us down a whole new,
No, I think it's tweaks.
okay, great.
It's just a different way to conceptualize it.
Super. So 22nd and 29th, no.
No, we had set the
12.
November
Oh,
12th.
November 12th is what-
Sorry, guys.
We had said November
Yes,
12th,
12th
and
and
then-
25th.
25th would be our final.
Yeah,
So we have to be really expeditious on the 12th in terms of,
How long do we have on?
Make it as long as you want.
Do you need to make it longer?
3. You have 9, you said 9:30. We've come
I have
to
9, but you can change that.
I will have to be remote
This is what I
that
have
day
on
and only part of the day.
Fine.
What happens if we're not reelected?
You're still on, because you're still a legislator.
You're still on the hook.
Until this new person
Nice
takes.
try,
it,
Sarah.
so- But you're still.
Feel free to do the extra credit assignments that we gave.
Wait,
you.
so are we saying 9 or 9:30 on the 12th?
I'd say no.
If it's hard for people to get here for 9, then let's say 9:30.
Let's have an hour and a half drive.
Yeah.
It's a little different. You have half an hour, 45 minutes.
It took me 40 minutes to get through Burlington today. I'm not way out in the north.
So it's at 9:30, not 10 now?
Over an hour.
I had 10.
I had 10.
I had 10 to 3.
Thank
you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the conversation.
Good luck this evening.
I guess I have to ask the chair.
So wait, on the 12th, we're 9:30 to 3:30 are people okay with that?
Whatever.
I'm only gonna be available till.
We will, you and
Can't miss another kid day.
Can you just tell Annie where it's?
We'll do, yeah.
30 on the 12th, can do.
Yeah, thank you. And,
We don't have snow.
yeah, right, that's true. And then on the 25th,
Yes,
I guess we can wait and see what happens on the
Yeah.
12th to decide timing.
yeah.
because that's a week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
No, it's after Thanksgiving.
That's a week
No,
of
it's the week of Thanksgiving.
That's the week of
right.
Thanksgiving.
Should we will go off live if that's okay with everybody? And we'll see you at our next meeting on the 12th.